Clutching his back and yelling in pain, Brian felt himself slowly bleeding out. Chaos filled the cavern as his fellow soldiers called out the creature's movements. He felt himself slowly slipping away as his consciousness faded. After their first mission, Brian was promptly promoted, but he didn't feel like he deserved it. Furthermore, the seed of depression was planted, knowing that the family of the young soldier that was killed would be lied to. Of course, they couldn't tell him the truth, but that didn't change how he felt about the situation. A week or two passed as the team stayed on base, waiting for their next assignment, and it would come the following Monday. They were called into the briefing room where the lieutenant was waiting with a huge smile on his face, as if nothing happened. He told them that their last mission was a huge success. They hadn't recovered a fresh body of the Sabe in 20+ years. The bodies were examined by the scientists and had the exact same genetic makeup as the one found over 2 decades ago. Of course, this meant little to the team as they weren't familiar with the DNA science, nor how this would be used. Brian, now given a higher clearance, was put in charge of his own platoon of soldiers. The lieutenant had combed through several reports of, quote, unknown animal attacks, and found several cases for the team, so they were divided into separate platoons. Brian and his team were sent to southern Kentucky to investigate a string of mysterious killings near the local woods. Brian spoke to the families of the victims, who voiced their concerns. The father of one of the victims was also a hunter, so when Brian suggested that a bear could be responsible, he grew visibly upset. The father claimed no bear could sneak into his backyard and drag his daughter over 15 miles into the woods without him hearing a single noise or without a single track being found. The local sheriff had told the father the same story, but he wasn't buying it. His daughter was found partially devoured. Her clothing was missing besides her boots, which was found next to her body as if they were placed there. Curious, Brian asked the man what he thought happened, and he said he had several theories, none of which involved any kind of animal. The most notable one was he believed a serial killer was on the loose and the local sheriffs were covering it up. The following morning, Brian and his team were escorted by the sheriff into the woods through a small trail where the body was recovered. Once again, the same signs were present: a single footprint, a lingering foul odor, and a faint trail of broken debris. So, they set up cameras throughout the woods and monitored them overnight. Unfortunately, nothing was captured on video. However, they did pick up on some interesting audio. One of the team members specialized in computers and audio and was a very good friend of Brian, as they joined Special Forces at the same time. While combing through the audio, he noticed a faint recording that wasn't audible. After enhancing the audio and raising the volume, the hair stood up all over his body and a shiver went down his spine. It was a scream or a howl of sorts, a low rumbling noise, not audible to the human ears without audio enhancement. This was brought to the team's attention, and they pinpointed which camera had recorded the audio. Using this information, they went back to the woods and set traps. Doing so, Brian and a few others on the team couldn't help but to feel like they were being watched. The uneasy feeling continued to grow the longer they spent in the woods. So after the traps were placed, they quickly left. 4:30 a.m. the following morning, Brian's phone rang. It was the local sheriff. Another person had been killed and partially devoured. This time it was a small town just 2 miles away from where they were stationed. The team loaded up their gear and got to the crime scene as soon as possible. The body was so badly mangled that the person no longer looked human. The skull was completely crushed, fingers and toes were missing. The sheriff's face was completely white. Although curious, he knew better than to ask any questions. After removing the body, the sheriff got his men out of the area as quick as possible and allowed the team to do their work and comb the woods. Using tracking methods, Brian and the team once again stumbled upon a mysterious single footprint. Only this time, they got the idea to cast a mold of it. The footprint measured 84 inches long, 14 inches wide. The creature was massive. The team searched the entire area and could not find a single trail or a sign of disturbance where the creature could have went. It was as if the body was dropped out of the sky and landed there. No footprints leading to the body, no drag marks, nothing. On the way back to HQ, they stopped to check their traps, the ones that they had set. They set about roughly 11 or 12 of them and put food inside of each one. They split up into 3 groups to cover more ground while searching the traps. Brian's jaw dropped when he realized the food was missing from every trap they had set. But no animal was smart enough to avoid these dual traps. The level of intelligence scared Brian to his core. It was almost like human behavior. As he reached for his radio to ask if other traps were empty, several shots rang out just a few meters away. Quickly, the teams converged on the location, finding a single wounded soldier and noticing the other 2 people that was with him were missing. They were no longer hunting this creature. It was hunting them. The lieutenant called Brian and asked for an update on the situation, and that's when he was alerted of the missing soldiers and the one that was injured. Brian was scolded for this failure. Immediately, a tactical response unit was sent out to assist the team in the recovery of the soldiers. They waited till nightfall to mass their activities and arrived to the woods via Black Hawk helicopter. They decided since the thermal imaging and LiDAR had worked before, they would try it again. Although this time, they weren't as lucky. The 2 soldiers were declared missing in action. Their families were told they went missing during a mission in Afghanistan. Brian now had 2 more possibly dead soldiers on his consciousness. He was contemplating stepping down from his newly found position. Due to the failure, Brian's team was removed from the mission and replaced with another UCCU platoon. The lieutenant decided it was best for Brian to take a few days off of active duty and assigned him to desk work. Given his new clearance level, he had access to more information. During the downtime, he began reading more classified documents, some of which would completely change his life and the view of the world. One document titled 47B-36 in particular completely shook Brian up. Inside the folder was a DNA analysis of the Kandahar giant and the DNA analysis of the Sabe they recovered on the previous mission. The giant's DNA matched the Sabe's DNA, a 98% match. He also noticed older documents from the 50s with the names of royal families and names of people who owned large corporations. At first, he didn't understand why these names were on the document. That was, until he flipped the page. The royal families and the families of those in power all share the unknown 2% DNA that was found in the Sabe and later in the giant. Meaning they share the same bloodline as the giant and these creatures. How could that be, he wondered. What does this mean? Brian heard commotion down the hall and went to investigate. This was a choice he wished he never made. Walking into the room, Brian saw the other UCCU team standing next to 2 body bags. They had recovered the bodies of the missing soldiers. Similar to the victims in Kentucky, they were brutally mauled, missing limbs and fingers. The death of these soldiers would push Brian over the edge. He would later step down from the position that he was recently promoted to, and this created tension between him and the lieutenant that was in control of the program. Brian was forced to undergo a psychiatric evaluation to determine if he was fit for duty. He considered failing it on purpose so he could abandon the project, but he didn't want to abandon his team. He was given a leave of absence instead and returned home for a few weeks to spend time with his family. His son Gunnar surprised him, revealing he would also be joining the Special Forces. A few years ago, this news would have made him proud, but immediately it brought up memories of the young soldier that was killed on their first mission with the UCCU. He feared that his son could be recruited into the same unit as him, and he didn't want that. He tried to talk his son out of the decision, but it was already too late. He was scheduled to be leaving the following week for basic training. During his leave, Brian began going to church again and fell heavily into the Bible as he once did as a teenager. This is when he had a sudden realization. He was listening to the pastor speak of fallen angels in the Nephilim. That's when he first thought, and it first crossed his mind, could the giants he encountered be Nephilim? Could the 2% unknown DNA be that of fallen angels? This encouraged Brian to return to work. But now his clearance level had been lowered back to what it was before the promotion, so he no longer had access to the library of classified documents. But that didn't stop him. Using the guise of briefing for a mission, he was able to make his way into the file room. This is when he discovered the document that would change everything. Buried deep within the filing cabinets, Brian found documents about black military projects and deep underground military bases. His lieutenant had lied to all of them. The government had been finding these Sabe and giants since at least the 40s, and ever since. They had a deep underground military base in the desert where they kept these beings alive to study them. The file contained pictures of large enclosed habitats similar to a zoo. These habitats included Sabe and the giants. There are photos of medical labs where the giants are kept in stasis chambers to keep them alive, basically in a deep sleep. The documents contained a list of rules for those who entered the underground base, and one of these rules in particular made Brian's jaw drop to the floor. Rule number 13 stated, those who enter the 23rd floor, aka the habitat floor, under no circumstance may say the name Jesus Christ or any variation of his name. Attached to the paper was an incident report detailing a mass casualty event that occurred on December 4th, 1991. A female soldier that was new to the facility was taken to the 23rd floor, the habitat floor, for the first time, and she became paralyzed with fear when glancing into the habitat. She yelled out the words, Jesus Christ. This sent the Sabe into a bloodthirsty rage. The reinforced glass chamber was thought to be impenetrable because they had never attempted to break it before. But the name of Jesus sent the creature into a trance-like state full of rage, increasing its power. The two Sabes smashed through the glass chamber, killing 16 personnel members, including that new woman soldier. The floor was put into lockdown. A sedative gas was pumped into the airlocked room to put the creatures into a deep sleep to regain control. Following this incident, the rules were updated to include rule number 13. This discovery left Brian shook. It confirmed his theory that these creatures and the giants were indeed of a demonic nature, and not only that, but the bloodline is also inside those who run the country and the program he works for. The following day, Brian and his team were sent on another mission. This time, they were sent back to Kandahar, Afghanistan. Soldiers had killed another giant and discovered a cave system that could be over 200,000 years old. His team geared up for combat even though they were told the cave was scanned with LiDAR and was empty. They were deployed to that cave that afternoon. With this newly found information, Brian couldn't help but to feel off. Secretly, he was wearing his Christian cross tucked under his body armor. The 12-man team entered the cave, walking for miles down the winding passageways. The deeper they went into the cave, the more they started to notice a buzzing sound in their ears. They couldn't quite put their finger on what it was, but it sounded familiar, almost like a dog whistle. "We got movement," the lead soldier called out, causing the team to come to a halt. The buzzing sound grew louder. Brian mentioned to the team that he could smell the foul odor once again. This was a key indicator that they were not alone. The audio specialist got an idea to use the frequency scanning tool, and sure enough, the buzzing noise was the same noise from the woods, a low-frequency rumble or growl. The team figured this was their way of communicating. They braced themselves for a frontal assault as they turned the corner. The thermal imaging and night vision began to malfunction. Their flashlights started to flicker on and off, making it difficult to see in the dark cave. Abruptly, things went from bad to worse. A blood-curdling scream came from in front of them, deep inside the cave. As they turned to look at each other, their equipment completely quit working, and at that very moment, a 10-foot-tall, red-haired giant came charging forward with a bronze spear. The team opened fire, retreating backwards, falling right into the trap. 2 other red-haired giants attacked them from behind, pinning them in the tunnel. Panic set in as the chaos broke out, and friendly fire happened again, this time due to low visibility. Brian felt pressure hit his back as he fell to the ground. Everything went silent, besides the ringing in his ears from the gunshots going off next to his head. Laying on the ground, clutching his back and yelling in pain, Brian felt himself slowly bleeding out. Chaos filled the cavern as his fellow soldiers called out the creature's movements. He felt himself slowly slipping away as his consciousness began to fade. He attempted to stand up but couldn't feel his legs. He could only move his arms. Coming to terms with the situation, he clutched his cross, telling himself this was the end. He felt a set of hands grab his vest and started pulling him up the tunnel. As they got closer to the surface, their gear began working again. Gunfire echoed loudly through the cave, along with the screams of his fellow soldiers. At this point, Brian had completely lost consciousness from blood loss. He would wake up 32 hours later in the military hospital back at base. He was told a fellow soldier had pulled him out to safety, grabbing him by his vest and pulling him out of the cave. Out of the 12 soldiers, only 5 made it out alive. The audio specialist, one of Brian's good friends, unfortunately was one of the 7 casualties. Even worse news, Brian was now paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors told him he would never be able to walk again and would be wheelchair bound. Due to his severe injury, Brian was given an honorable discharge, and this time, his time in Special Forces was over. Before he was allowed to leave, he had to be debriefed on his cover story, and he was to tell anyone that asked a Taliban ambush had caused his injuries in Kandahar. He was reminded of his NDA before being sent home. That mission was Brian's last day as a Special Forces sniper. Quickly, Brian's mental health would decline. He had severe PTSD and would often have night terrors, reliving that traumatic event over and over. Thank you for watching. This is the second part of the story. If you want the third and final part to be released, comment part 3 down below, and I will drop it ASAP. Have a good day. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. See you in the next one.